Get ready for the Ochelli Effect.
I'm a big fan of the show.
Chuck Ochelli, and he's been known for many years as a blind JFK researcher specializing in intelligence agency involvement in multiple assassination, propaganda, and other global criminal operations in the 20th and 21st centuries.
Your listeners are extremely fortunate to have you.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media.
Chuck Ochelli!
13th day of September 2018, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar, and this indeed is the Ochelli Effect. Broadcast live from the facilities of Ochelli.com, but also heard on a variety of other networks and in some other odd places, including through replay and our friends who are running a pirate FM signal up north. We do appreciate you and acknowledge you without identifying you for legal reasons. Thank you. Anyway, it is a Thursday or Thursday night, and I was not well enough to get to do the show last night. I do apologize to you guys, but we are going to do something very, very different here on a Thursday. Generally speaking, this is the night that I devote to the assassinations and the various provable conspiracies of the past and stuff like that. But I wanted to take this opportunity to actually put my time and effort where my mouth is regarding, hey, the alternative media is not focusing enough on 9/11, is not getting to rational discussions and reasonable discourse regarding one of the greatest crimes committed in our lifetimes. And you know what? Put my money where my mouth is. This will be the first in a series which I will now dub 9/11 Voices. Now, what is going to happen here? We're going to continue on, obviously, from some of the discussion we had on Tuesday night, which I think was a fascinating show. And if you heard the after effect, which you can get by either being on my Patreon list or going over to Ochelli.com and becoming a member, you know what? There is a lot of stuff going on and a lot of discussion that needs to be had. Now, one of the guys that was on that show is Adam Fitzgerald. He's somebody that hardly anybody has actually heard from yet. However, I wanted to have him back on and did not feel as though I was fair to him on Tuesday. Apparently, I got some feedback from you guys. You agree. I cut him off a little too early and did not allow him to speak to his pacing. I was looking for somebody a little faster paced during that time. I brought in callers. I brought in questions. I derailed his discussion. Well, we're not going to do that tonight. He's back with me, and in fact, he is going to be the first guest. We may have authors, we may have filmmakers, we may bring back some of the people that I've had on in the past. You guys know I've had filmmakers on here. You guys know I've had various types of authors on here. I am going to go through the gamut here. Anybody that can make a reasonable presentation and have a rational and productive, there's the key, productive discussion regarding this, I'm going to attempt to bring it to you. And we're going to pepper the broadcasts throughout the weeks with it. As you guys know, I do this 5 days a week, but you know what? We're going to make this part of the centrifuge, if you will, of the machine of stuff that I'm putting out. Because somebody's got to. Okay? I'm not necessarily the most knowledgeable guy when it comes to 9/11. I can tell you, my personal experiences, which I've done. I can tell you what I've read, what I've seen, etc. But you know what? I'm going to learn right along with you guys as we go through. Now, as I said before, Adam Fitzgerald is back with me, and I think this is going to be a good conversation. I'm going to do my best to kind of stay calm and stay out of the way here a bit and just facilitate. Also, I need to thank Jeffrey Lipinski for remaining a member at Ochelli.com, and there's your shout-out. Also, Brandy, I never got that message from you, but here's your shout-out. As promised, I always do this. Guys, if you have suggestions, people that you want to point me to, information you want to point me to about 9/11, simply write an email to info@Ochelli.com and put in the subject area 9/11, and I will pay special attention to it and make it part of this show as it develops, and this subset especially. Can't ask for more than that as far as I'm concerned. Okay, now, on to the guest finally, now that Chuck's run his mouth for 5 minutes. Adam Fitzgerald, you were with us on Tuesday night. You started into a very interesting discussion. I'm not going to try and pick that up right this second, but first off, how are you doing tonight?
No, not bad, Chuck. I'm glad to be back on, and I'm going to come at it from a much different perspective. I'm going to be coming at it from a symmetrical timeline, where it's going to be rather convenient for the listener, but it's absolutely relevant. And the points that are going to be raised actually is a historical timeline pre 9/11, but have direct relevancy to what happened on the day itself.
Well, this is something that I always like to do, Adam, because quite honestly, if you don't understand the context of a historical event, if you don't understand what the groundwork was that was laid before it and the foundation upon which it sits, you never understand the event. And I mean, that goes for the most major things in the world. You know, like to me, the Kennedy assassination is a huge event and definitely changed the trajectory of this country. If you don't understand what was going on previous to Kennedy's assassination, it's difficult to make an argument about what actually occurred in the aftermath and why it was even remotely significant. Otherwise, you know what? You got one guy being president, another guy being president. If you don't know that there was a significant change on that day, then you can't even begin to say that there might have been a motive to change things that day. You know, and meanwhile, that's a separate issue. But hey, when we talk about 9/11, you gotta understand how we came into things before that day, and you gotta understand really what the reality of all things was previously, because as I've stated on this show repeatedly, we are in the post 9/11 reality. And that means nothing if you know nothing about what came before it. Am I right or wrong?
No, that's absolutely right. In fact, when people usually ask me what happened on 9/11, they usually want a 5 to 10 minute answer, and I can't do it because I would be shortchanging the issue. So instead, usually I like to have a long-term discussion that involves numerous historical instances that led up to 9/11 itself, because if you can't understand the individuals, the organizations, the geopolitics behind 9/11, you won't be able to understand 9/11 whatsoever.
Absolutely true. So where do we begin, honestly? I mean, and believe me, I just want to let you know before you begin, I sympathize with you about the whole, okay, tell me what happened. When it comes to the Kennedy assassination, which I've spent more than a couple of decades now studying, right? Tell me what happened. You can't.
Right. Yeah.
It's not even possible. And that's an event that took 6 seconds to unfold, or maybe 8 or possibly 10, depending on who you talk to, that created a whole slew of investigations and events. But 9/11 was a much larger event. And really, if it wasn't for the fact that people have been digging at JFK for 50 years, should by all rights have a much larger body of evidence, information, and various angles coming together for somebody to understand it. And for people to kind of just go, okay, so tell me what you think happened. It just isn't that simple. You know, I mean, I can tell you that the official story's no good, but that in no way answers what actually happened, does it? To simply deny that something is true doesn't fix the hole in somebody's mind of, okay, fill in the blank, what happened. So I absolutely appreciate and sympathize and am anxiously awaiting how it is you would describe this, because I dare say there's more than one way to look at how this actually came together, but I'm interested to see how you view it, and how we might be able to take that and begin to tell the story of what actually happened on 9/11 in context. So by all means, go ahead.
Right, and I would start at a recent point in time. I could go back further, but it'll be too much. I'm pretty sure that during the course of this discussion, I'm going to miss out on key points. But because 9/11 is such an extensive storyline, that I'm going to pick certain points of time, and they're all going to be relative to the day itself. So I'm going to start with the Afghan-Soviet War, which took place on December 24th, 1979. And I'm going to try and to detail it in a convenient, more easily related fashion for the listener. So I would say prior to the Soviet invasion, the Afghan Communist Party took over the country, which was a coup started by the Saur Revolution, or the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, which installed Nur Muhammad as president of the country. This saw radical changes which directly influenced the more traditional rural religious sector of the population. The government, led by Nur Muhammad, was extremely brutal and witnessed dozens of large-scale massacres of the Pashtun farmers there. Those of the religious sector got the worst of it. The government, while enacting these violent acts, saw relative infighting of their own. Basically, in 1979, November 1979, Nur Muhammad was executed on the orders of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs, Hafizullah Amin, which in turn soured relations with the Soviet Union. On December 24, 1979, under orders, Leonid Brezhnev deployed the 40th Army Regiment and overtook the capital, Kabul, and overthrew the government and executed Hafizullah Amin. This saw the insurgents of the religious sector in Afghanistan and come to a full initialization and started the beginning stages of the Soviet-Afghanistan War. With Pakistan as the primary funder of financial and military aid, it also gave rise to a relatively unknown Saudi businessman who would later on become one of the more primary focal points of the war after 9/11, Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden came from a relatively wealthy family. His father owned the largest construction company called the Bin Laden Saudi Group. We're located in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Helped refurbish Mecca and Medina. Osama bin Laden actually was a primary focal point for the war. The CIA and Pakistan ISI started backing larger warlords bigger than bin Laden, who wield massive influence over the region. One of them was Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. He was of the Hezbollah Islamiyya. Abdul Rasul Sayyaf of the Islamic Union of Afghanistan, and Ahmed Shah Massoud, who led the Jamiat-e-Islamiyya. As the war raged, this gave rise to a known Pakistan militant called Abdullah Azam. He would play an important part in the war and in the future. He would implement a new ideology which would extensively replace the older pan-Arab nationalism, which was a different version of jihad. This type of jihad would replace the nationalist fervor that would be fighting within the war with the older region of the religious sector. This religious mindset to young Muslims coming out of the madrasas in Islamabad, Pakistan, together with Osama bin Laden, and Egyptian-born and newer member of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, Ayman al-Zawahiri, which will later play an important part during the years leading up to 9/11. They formed an office called the Maktab al-Khidmat, which is the Afghan Services Bureau. Now, this would be responsible for recruiting Muslims worldwide. The Afghans that would be fighting in the war, they would actually pay them a one-way ticket because most of them would die during the war anyway, and they would train them militarily. Now, the Maktab al-Khidmat was later funded by the Pakistan ISI and the CIA, as well as the British MI6. It would garner about $600 billion in aid.
Okay, let me interrupt you for a moment because
Sure.
I think a piece of context needs to be added to what you're talking about.
Absolutely.
And this is a pivotal point that you're talking about where, you have the Mujahideen, as they became known, really the foreign fighters that were introduced into Afghanistan that were headed by bin Laden. They were these interesting players in this warfare that was going on, certainly, but simultaneous to this, we have the hostage crisis emerging in Iran. That was later on in 1979. I think it was in November when that started.
Right.
And you have that context which needs to be added. There is certainly the emergence of various terrorists who had been out there for a variety of causes. I mean, people like the most dangerous man ever at the time, I think, in the 1980s was a guy named Ahmad Mukniya, and this guy was practically legendary, like beyond Carlos the Jackal in his skill set and all of that. rather interesting. There is the rise of and the discussion of these different Islamic factions really seeming to spring up all over the Middle East. And one must put this as a backdrop, I think, to what's happening in Afghanistan. Because, okay, the Soviets become involved here, and they're doing their thing. And meanwhile, you know, one might view this as merely a proxy war between the old Soviet republic, if you will, or, you know, the old Soviet Union, and the U.S., as we had done in various other places where we were supposed to be fighting the spread of communism. This wasn't a dead idea by the 1980s, and it's kind of interesting that this continued on along with this situation with the Shah of Iran, which, by the way, you want to go further back for context, we could talk about American intervention and interference in foreign lands dating well before the time period you started at. But this whole situation with the Shah of Iran leaving and being deposed, if you will, and the rise of what? The mullahs, the Khomeinis, the Ayatollah Khomeini, and I think there's more than just him, but the various more extremist religious groups that are supposed to be now taking hold after many years of, well, attempts at British colonization and intervention by various Western governments. This was a reaction. Now, what's happening in Afghanistan, though, is kind of unique because there are so many moving parts to it. I think it's often oversimplified when people look back at it. Oh, yeah, the Soviets were there for a while, but that was then, this is now, and we're there now longer than we've been anywhere else. And when I say we, I do mean the United States military-industrial complex, is there longer than any other place they've ever been. But all of what you're talking about has kind of been lost in the discussion over time and really is not part of anybody's lens on this, it seems like. So I just wanted to provide this overall backdrop and what the rest of the world was doing. You know, the Soviet Union was not looking at collapse at this time. They were certainly still a power which could exert itself in various locations. And when they attempted to do this in Afghanistan, they sort of did what we did in Vietnam. Seems like they won the battles but lost the war. Kind of curious that keeps happening. Anyway, I wanted to provide that as you go further, but please continue.
Right, and I think you brought up a couple of good points because we saw a rise between the years of 1978 to about 1985. This new religious sector that was overtaking, as I was saying before, about the pan-Arabist nationalist view. This new jihad, which was implemented earlier by Sayyid Qutb, who was a known Islamic scholar, and wrote a couple of books about the subject of his torture, which was due to the Iranians for years later. The Iranians, which you brought up with Imid Mughmiyah, the Iranian regime, which was led by Ayatollah Khomeini and the Shia revolution. But before that, Iran was actually primarily a democratic secular nation, which was overtaken years later after the 1953 coup, which was saw the elimination of Mohammad Mossadegh, which was later found out planned out by the CIA, actually. But getting back
exactly, you know, and right. That's an interesting thing here is that the secret police that were created and in fact trained by our CIA and instituted, utilized, weaponized, if you will, by the Shah of Iran, the guy that we call the Shah of Iran, who was really a reinstalled monarch from a previous dynasty, if you will. Because as you said, they were a democratic sort of society. I mean, Mohammad Mossadegh was elected by his people, and then sabotaged by subterfuge and propaganda and various terrorist acts by the CIA. And this is now, you know, publicly known. But it's rather interesting that this is what leads into this. So the Savak, which was his secret police, these were the people who were brutal torturers and would disappear and murder individuals seemingly without any sort of retribution ever being delivered to them until the time when the Ayatollahs actually took over the country from this interestingly installed Shah. Anyway, all of that is going on, and I'm just saying it's part of the context. So please continue.
There was a point also about Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was the White House security advisor under Jimmy Carter. Actually, he wrote a book called The Grand Chessboard, and this would later on play an important role about the destabilization of the Middle East, and much of his analysis concerned with the geostrategy of the Middle East and Central Asia, and focusing on the power of the Eurasian landmass in a post-Soviet environment. He actually would later on go and visit numerous Mujahideen warlords and try and push forward almost like this momentum carrying behind him, knowing that even though the United States couldn't be intimately involved in the war, because that would be a war between the United States and Soviet Union, but they would covertly give them the weapons that would needed to overthrow the Soviet invasion would be the Stinger missile. And in 1980, in 1989, we saw the Soviet Union end the war and going back to Russia after they absconded Kabul in Afghanistan. After the war, this caused a large-scale civil war within the country, most notably between Ahmed Shah Massoud, who I described formerly. He became a part of the Northern Alliance, and, of course, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who later sided with Mullah Omar in the Taliban. Ahmed Shah Massoud would be killed, most notably one day before September 11th, actually. What came after the Afghanistan war? Well, we saw a large-scale, newly refined religious sector that now resided in numerous countries, because most of the people that fought in the war and survived went back to Malaysia, the Philippines, the United States, the Sudan, and Iraq. And with them brought this new jihadist mentality. So much like an American soldier who returns home to the United States, they now have to turn off that instance in their head about the war mentality, much like these people going back to their countries with this new jihadist mentality. And from here, it relates to the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. In 1979 as well, going back, Omar Abdel Rahman, who is called the Blind Sheikh, would apply for a U.S. visa. He would be exempt at the U.S. Embassy, but he would reapply, and while being on a terrorist watch list, he would actually gain entry to the United States. So in 1990, he went to the United States and arrived at the Al-Khifa Mosque, which would be the secondary MAC office, or the Maktab el-Kidmak office, on the whims of Mustafa Shalabi, who was the imam of the Al-Khifa Mosque, which was right next door to the Al-Farouk Mosque. Shalabi would fall out of favor with Abdel Rahman. In 1991, Mustafa Shalabi was killed in his apartment in Brooklyn. Abdel Rahman took over the Al-Farouk Mosque, and in 1992 called on a notable figure in Pakistan called Ramzi Yousef. Along with Ahmed Najaj, they were arriving in the United States, traveling from Pakistan. While at JFK, Yousef would apply for political asylum under a very crudely made ID, but he would be let go and given a temporary status inside the United States. Ahmed Najaj, at the same time, would be held in detention as JFK security found bomb manuals and videos of terrorist activity. He would be found, which would be found in his luggage, by the way. While Yousef would arrive at the Al-Farouk Mosque, a judge would be held in temporary detention at the tombs in New York. Under the behest of Abdel Rahman, Ramzi Yousef began building a bomb which would later be used to bomb the World Trade Center. Yousef would make the bomb from urea nitrate. Now, the reason why I'm saying urea nitrate because later on during the years, this would be the same bomb used in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. That would have a somewhat of a weak link within Ramzi Youssef, because according to Terry Nichols, he actually visits the Philippines in 1994, and Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh were novices according to bomb building. When they arrived at the Philippines, because Terry Nichols' wife is from the Philippines, he goes there, and according to certain instances of the FBI, Terry Nichols meets up with Ramzi Youssef. This was backed by testimony from someone within Abu Sayyaf, who later became an FBI informant, and they themselves said that Terry Nichols actually learned bomb making with Ramzi Youssef. 2 weeks later, Terry Nichols arrives in Oklahoma City, and they bomb the Murrah building using urea nitrate. That's the reason why I'm bringing that up.
Right. No, and I understand that. I got to tell you, it's really, really interesting, because the characters that you're bringing together here in this part of the discussion, a lot of them seem to have been influenced by or allowed to proceed in certain activities quite unabated due to the cooperation of various, assets that should have been conducting security for the United States. I mean, it's really interesting here. When you get into the 93 bombing, I mean, you have a guy who is being instructed, partially, there's the story about the Philippines, but part of the way he's being instructed is also suspect. And to tell you the truth, I think that the reality, and Nichols, by the way, just as a individual, not entirely reliable. This guy has changed his story several times. It's very, very strange. All I'm trying to state here is that there is a nexus of suspect stuff going on relating to this. This is when we get introduced to the concept that there could be, homegrown terrorists and terrorist activity literally on American soil previous to that bombing of the World Trade Center and previous to what happened in Oklahoma City. I mean, the concept of terrorism was virtually a fairy tale to most Americans. And it's really, really interesting how there are all sorts of holes in a lot of these stories. I mean, I got to tell you, I have a lot of questions about Oklahoma City and still about the 93 bombing, regardless of the fact that, the blind sheikh goes to prison and some other people, renting a Ryder truck, get themselves caught when they go to try and actually, get their deposit back, and all these other weird things going on. Very, very strange, as to who is really behind a lot of this stuff. And this is where it begins to get weird. Okay, and before we even get to 9/11, you've got a lot of questions that I think have not been satisfactorily answered. I just want to register that with you as you go forward here, because there's a lot of open questions involved in how terrorism originally really came to the United States. I know in reality that terrorism had been here since our inception, okay? There were various things that were terrorist acts that were not called terrorism that had happened throughout America's history. But this is where we get into what is typically thought of to be modern terrorism regarding the bombing of buildings, mass casualty events one way or another. And here we go with the beginning of what later develops into the justification for a lot of things. And I think that that it's relevant to mention this right here, that there is still a lot of open questions about this. Yes, I'm aware McVeigh's been executed. Yes, I'm aware that this is supposed to be a lot of closed questions from a legal standpoint and all that. But I got to tell you, personally, I don't buy it all. Okay, just let you know as you go through
right
here. But this is all very relevant. Please continue.
Right. Just to expound on your point about asking questions even before 9/11, I can't state how important that is enough, because a lot of people, when they discuss 9/11, never really link the 1993 bombing with it, and it goes often under the carpet. Nobody ever really talks about the 1993 bombing, and what I don't want with happening with, even though it's not as big as 9/11, what I'm afraid is that in the future, 20 years time, 9/11 will become almost similar to that aspect of like people forgetting the incident altogether. And when people start doing this, you start erasing history, start forgetting history, and you forget about the most important aspects of what's behind these incidences and the finer details of what was going on before 9/11 is just as important as what was going on before the 93 bombing or the Soviet war and JFK, whatever historical aspect you pick.
Yeah.
And right. I mean,
absolutely true. And let me just add on to what you're saying. Not only is it important for understanding how we came to these events, but let us also recognize that without them, the world as it exists would not be as it exists. Okay, it's just that simple because I object to the concept of surrendering my privacy, my ability to move around this country without the proper paperwork in hand, the triple ID scanning, various elements of surveillance that have come into being part of the reality through these fusion centers. All of this stuff, to me, is an anathema to an allegedly free society. And it has all been justified based on these events which led up to 9/11 and then 9/11 itself. Let us not forget any of that, because if we do, then of course, why would this be significant? You know what? It was a terrible day. That's the end of the story. Right? It was a terrible event, and maybe it happened. Maybe it didn't happen. Maybe it was just a TV show. They had TV shows like this. I don't want to see it get convoluted and lost. Not simply because, let's remember there were human beings that literally lost their lives, and that should always count. But let's also remember it because ever after, the justification for a lot of things, whether they be wars or they be the restriction of people's abilities to conduct themselves in a society, your literal movements, all of these things have been curtailed, altered, and irrevocably changed in the aftermath of these events. So there is no way to stress the importance of this enough. So, I just want to say that, it's not just about the groundwork that led up to it, but all of that led up to these events which did change things. And if you deny that there was a change, well, I guess, you might be 17 years old and not remember a reality before this, in which case I excuse you. But if you are somebody who is old enough to have remembered a time before 9/11 happened, you can't tell me that the attitude of this country, the attitude of many parts of the world, and the behaviors that have been engaged in by governments, agencies, groups of individuals, political movements, everything else has been absolutely altered and tainted, in my estimation, by these events. So there's no way to overstate how important it is to understand what changed the world around you, Adam. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, a lot of people tend to dismiss the generalities of certain events, such as 9/11 or JFK or the 93 bombing. And if you can't grasp the concept of certain events and how important it is that shapes the present moment at this time, you're going to be living in a field of ignorance. That's why I'm starting at a certain point in time explaining 9/11 to you, because all these incidents I'm trying to explain right now have relevancy to the present moment at this day. And I could even get into what happened after 9/11, which I think is even worse than, I've always said what happened post 9/11 is worse than pre and the day itself, because what came after it, I hate to sound like a broken record, I mentioned this yesterday, is a ripple effect. Right. And that ripple effect from 9/11 is still felt today. And I think that what we're seeing today is far worse than what we saw on September 11, 2001.
Oh, right. Real simple math on that. The body count stopped, 3,000, call it whatever number you want, 2,800. The body count stopped for that event. we are still ticking away at it today as we speak, as far as what the ripple effect has actually caused. Pretty simple, I think. The people of Iraq might wonder, why we're not counting them because it's not being reported on. The people in, Yemen who are experiencing what they're experiencing might, want to tell you that the body count is still an open count. So, again, if it's not important to you that there's a justification for war, it's not important to you that there's a justification for your loss of rights and privileges. If it's not important to you, well, I don't know how you found my show. Good evening to you, and I'm not sure what's wrong with you, because this is the reality in which we live, and you're absolutely correct. So I interrupted you around the time that you were bringing in the 93 bombing, and also the connection to McVeigh and Nichols. And let us remember that this is when anti-terrorism legislation was really truly being introduced, and when the government started taking actions and the police forces started to all of a sudden need to be armed a lot better. SWAT units didn't just have to be there for the cities when there might have been an uprising. Oh no, we needed these things everywhere. We needed to militarize the police. We needed to add to the military. We needed to strengthen ourselves because we indeed are vulnerable to attack. And, it's not something that we just watch and discuss, as if it is a TV show and it's the Palestinians and, the boogeyman of, what was Yasser Arafat was the big boogeyman, I think, back then to most Americans, because we didn't have a direct relationship in our own minds to what was happening in the Middle East. But that was the representative, right? Guys like this, or the occasional actual hijacking, or, there was a terrorist attack on this country you never heard of, and the people that attacked it came from this country you never really heard of. And most people had no idea where anything was in the Middle East. I mean, let us remember that too. So when you start to talk about what happened in Oklahoma City and how it started to change the attitude again of, the powers that be, if you will, but also it started to change political discourse, and the mindset of Americans. Suddenly, maybe a daycare center could be destroyed in the course of a bombing. Maybe there could be people that just went to work and were the victims of an asymmetrical attack for political purposes on their place of business, whether it was a government building or not. And this started to change the mindset of America. So please continue.
Yeah, and, that's another subject in itself, the Murrah building bombing, but that's for another day. Just to backtrack just a little bit. Now, Ramzi Youssef wasn't the original player to build the bomb for the World Trade Center. It was actually fallen on the lap of a known informant named Emad Salem. Emad Salem worked as a security guard at the Russian consulate in New York City, was recruited by the FBI to spy and to give information detailing Russian collusion within the country itself, whether there was mafia ties within the country or whatever. He then was seen as a valuable asset, and an FBI handler named Nancy Floyd actually recruited him to infiltrate the Brooklyn ring led by Omar Abdel Rahman. And because Emad Salem was from Egypt, he was very familiar with Omar Abdel Rahman. He spoke Arabic as well. So Emad Salem was recruited. He then became a member of the mosque, the Al Farouk Mosque. He was trusted to be a bodyguard for Abdul Rahman, and then was in on the intimate plans for the bombing of the World Trade Center and was tasked to build the bomb. But because he relayed the information to Nancy Floyd and the FBI said to stall, do whatever you can to persuade the bombing from happening. He couldn't do it, but the FBI grew very suspicious of the close relationship between him and Nancy Floyd, and they terminated Emad Salem from being an informant because he gave very little information, according to the New York FBI field office. Now, because Emad Salem was terminated as an informant, he then went back to the mosque and gave a false scenario and said to the Omar Abdel Rahman, he told them that he was being followed by the FBI and that they should replace him from building the bomb, and they did. They believed them. So Ahmed Rahman called on Ramzi Youssef. Now, the irony is that Ramzi Youssef does build the bomb with the help of Abdel Rahman Yassin, Mahmoud Abalima, Ahmed Ajaj. By the way, Ahmed Ajaj has a nefarious history. He was arrested for counterfeiting dollars in Lebanon, was accosted by the Mossad, and became an informant for them, actually. Mohammed Salameh was also part of the ring. On February 23rd, 1993, the bomb was placed at the B2 level of One World Trade, and at 12:17, the bomb exploded. It killed 6 people, injured 1,042 people, and created a 4-story hole underneath the garages. The idea of this bomb was that Ramzi Youssef wanted the bomb to create a hole so big that the tower itself would lean into the other tower, World Trade Center 2, therefore slamming into Lower Manhattan and killing probably tens of thousands of people. But the damage wasn't strong enough, and the supports held. So Ramzi Youssef was quite dismayed, but he then phoned in his threat from the Palestine Liberation Organization, which didn't even exist at the time, some Palestinian group he made up at the time, to New York, the NYPD in Manhattan. He then fled to Pakistan. Shortly thereafter, Mohammed Salameh went back to the Ryder truck deposit to get his deposit so he could flee the country. Now, this is almost asinine to believe that he wouldn't have money to flee the country, but so be it. He was arrested after a sting because the axle of the Ryder truck actually survived the explosion. The FBI then got the VIN number from the axle, which went back to the Ryder truck, the Ryder truck company, where they did a stakeout on the day that Mohammed Salameh went back for his deposit. Mm-hmm. Now, the guy at the desk was an FBI agent, but he was playing the rental agreement operator, and he was toying with Mohammed Salameh, knowing he had all the time in the world. What's interesting, though, on the rental agreement was a name called Josie Hadass. Now, I know that name is not going to sound any familiar whatsoever, but Josie Hadass was a longtime Mossad operator. It also was he's also a landlord or the proprietor of a New Jersey apartment in which Mohammed Salameh lived at. Now, when the FBI went into the apartment, they found bomb-making manuals, they found explosives, they found bombs within the apartment, but nowhere to be found was Josie Hadass because he fled back to Israel. Now, Youssef would not be detained. He would in 1995. Him, along with Abdul Hakim Murad and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, would begin to construct a large-scale terrorist plot, and this would be the Bajinka plot. This would involve the following: the assassination of U.S. President Bill Clinton, Pope John Paul II, and to implement 11 bombs on 11 airliners from Asia to the United States and have them all simultaneously blow up on timing bombs underneath the seats where the fuselage lay, and have them all blow up over the Pacific where the evidence would not be found. Now, he was hoping to kill tens of thousands of people. 4,000 people along with it. But the plot never happened because while they were making bombs in the motel while they were staying at in the Philippines, one of the mixtures blew up in a sink. And this caused a big scene. Black smoke billowed out the window. And so Youssef and Abdul Hakim Murad fled the motel. While the fire department's there and the Philippine National Police arrived, Youssef actually orders Murad to go back and get the laptop in which the Bajinka plot's on. So Murad actually goes back into the motel. He's then accosted by the police. He's arrested after a short fleeing. But Youssef actually flees and escapes back to Pakistan. Murad actually, under interrogation, gives up the plot, gives up what was going to happen with the Bajinka plot, and Youssef would be captured later on by the Pakistan ISI and the U.S. Diplomatic Security Services in 1996 in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. he would be he would give up almost without interrogation. He would say that he was behind the 1993 bombing. He would give up that he was behind the Bajinka plot, and he would be sentenced in 1997, 240 years in solitary confinement by New York State judge. And this afterwards would relate to what we would have relating to the Hamburg cell, because Khalid Sheikh Mohammed in 1997 relayed information to bin Laden with a discussion he had prior to Abdul Hakim Murad's arrest. Now, what this plan was to require was Abdul Hakim Murad was actually a pilot, and he's insinuated to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that in order to further future attacks in the United States, you couldn't use bombs on planes because now that plot was known to U.S. authorities. So there would be another way of attacking the United States. And he stated to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed that he wanted to use the planes as weapons themselves. And Khalid Sheikh Mohammed said, all right, let me hear the plot to do this. And he said that you would have to train the hijackers as pilots within the United States and to instead use bombs, but use them to nosedive into high-value targets in the United States.
Now, what's interesting here is what we know about the various exercises that were conducted by the U.S. government, in the years leading up to 9/11, the years that led up to 2001. It seems as though they were aware of what was going on because they had started talking about airliners being weaponized in more than one fashion, not simply being blown up or being redirected like they used to be, put a gun to a pilot's head and tell him to land somewhere else. Nothing like that, or blowing them up. The United States had been familiar with this sort of thing and had, been aware of the weaponization of planes for a very, very long time. What do I point to here? Well, it just so happens that in 96, we got to see something called the Northwoods documents, which relate to an operation which was proposed to President Kennedy, related to, terrorists and creating a false flag event, a literal, which by the way is an overused term, but in this context is correct, a false flag event whereby, airliners could be hijacked and blown up and flown into rather terrible places and crashed and things like this under the guise of them having been hijacked by Cuban terrorists in order to justify an invasion of Cuba. This is, and they talked about doing it by remote control and creating a scenario by which, there were no passengers on the plane. There were passengers on the plane. It was, all over the place, but it was something that President Kennedy refused to sign off on and absolutely said, no way, we're doing this. But it's interesting that in the years leading up to 9/11, we start to learn about, Vigilant Guardian and a lot of these other programs where it seems like somebody must have known that this was part of the terrorist plots that were going on. We do have individuals who were informing on different things. So, the idea that this was some big shock on 9/11 to the entire intelligence apparatus of this country is absolutely ridiculous. I just want to say that because what you're laying out here is part of what was known, and I guarantee you there's a lot deeper and more detailed information that, people at the NSA, the CIA, et cetera, had regarding this. So this shouldn't have been a shock, and the idea that, they had to change their tactics because, well, now they're going to be a little more prepared for this bombing scenario, may indeed have been true. But at the same time, it's not like they weren't aware that there were these other concepts, other ideas, other possibilities that could have been introduced here, ranging from, utilizing things like Stinger missiles to take down commercial airliners to utilizing the commercial airliners directly. And there's a lot of talk about that. But I think people fail to recognize that, it's not like, the government had to quickly readjust, in order to deal with this. They knew about it ahead of time. Okay, they knew about these possibilities. They created training exercises to that effect. You don't create training exercises for your people unless you believe it's a scenario that could actually occur. All right? So, I call BS on anybody who says that, it was a big shock and things had to change because all of a sudden these people got innovative. That is absolutely ridiculous in my estimation. Anyway, Adam, please continue on. We're actually close to the end of the first hour. But I want to continue on this track you're going.
Right. No, and I think what's important that you brought up is that the reason why I'm bringing up the instance of the Pachinko plot and planes being used as weapons, because much like you said before, that the intelligence agencies like the CIA and the FBI knew that planes were now being regarded as weapons. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with Condoleezza Rice's testimony before the 9/11 Commission, which she famously states that that the State Department had no idea that they were going to use planes as weapons. Now, according to the Pachinko plot, the Philippine National Police actually gave that information to the FBI in 1995.
Right.
That's 6 years prior to 9/11. So,
right. And it would be information that she would have had to have been read into, during this time period, and especially with the increase of traffic and the fact that handing off to the Bush administration
right.
would have been all of this information, which was need to know. Okay, the State Department needed to know how to deal, even if you accept the idea that the State Department doesn't act in concert with the Central Intelligence Agency, which I'm here to tell you is false. But let's just say you believe that. You cannot say that the diplomatic corps was unaware of the threats and somebody like Condoleezza Rice had to have been read into it. So you have one of two choices with what she said in her testimony, which is either she perjured herself, okay, or she was so dramatically inept at her job that it's amazing that more things like 9/11 didn't happen while she was there. So take your pick, but I tend to fall on the side of I don't believe she's a fool or that inept. I believe that she perjured herself in order to cover up, for her own responsibility as well as the responsibility of others in ignoring what was coming down, regardless of who you think actually launched the attacks. They should have been aware, and things should have been in place to deal with this ahead of time. Sorry, but that's how I come up with it. And it doesn't matter what you believe about who is really behind the conspiracy, because even the official story is a conspiracy. No matter who you believe is behind it, no matter who you believe conducted it, to tell me that the State Department, the CIA, the president was not aware of these things as possibilities, as realities, and wasn't read into a whole lot of classified information that you and I are not privy to that should have alerted them even more, is absolutely laughable if that's what you think. And I don't mean you, Adam. I'm saying anybody who's listening to this. I mean, let's be honest. There's no way. Anyway, please continue for a couple of minutes before we go to break, because this story, it needs to continue on without too many more interruptions from me. I'm sorry.
No, that's right. I enjoy all the questions and the comments coming from you. But I'll lead up into the point where we take the break anyway, because after the break, it leads up into the day itself almost. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed actually relayed the information that he got from Abdul Hakim Murad to bin Laden in 1997. But Khalid Sheikh Mohammed modified the Pachinko plot to him. Now, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed absolutely said to bin Laden, he goes, he wanted to hijack 10 planes, with 9 planes crashing into high-value targets inside the United States, with the last plane being flown by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed himself. He would land the plane after killing all the males on the plane, leaving alive the women and the children. He would then land the plane and give a media discussion about why the attacks took place. Bin Laden said that, first of all, the operation would require too many people. It's too big. He then narrowed it down to four planes, 4 operations. But Bin Laden approved of the plan in 1998, and then asked Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to join him in Al-Qaeda. He refused. But a lot of people don't realize is that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed wasn't part of Al-Qaeda before 9/11. He only became part of Al-Qaeda after 9/11, after the attacks were successful. Bin Laden then asked certain individuals within Al-Qaeda to start helping him prepare for the attacks of 2000, which would take place in 2001. He actually wanted the attacks to happen much earlier than that, in fact, in 1999, but the preparations were taking so long that it happened on September 11, 2001. KSM would choose with the targets. Mohammed Atef, who was the Al-Qaeda military commander, would direct the actions of the hijackers, and bin Laden actually picked out the pilots that would be involved in the operation. He actually picked out Ziad Jarrah, Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shei, and Hani Hanjour. Now, there's going to be discussions later on why I think Ziad Jarrah and Hani Hanjour may not have been the pilots, but that's for later. Nevertheless, the operation was underway. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was in charge of the operation, and usually I get the question why wasn't bin Laden charged for 9/11? It's because he didn't orchestrate 9/11. He helped assist it. The orchestration of 9/11 came from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was a relative unknown to most of the intelligence services worldwide. He was actually unknown, born in Baluchistan, Pakistan, who is the uncle of Ramzi Youssef. But a lot of mystery is involving Khalid Sheikh Mohammed himself. Now, if you want to go into break and I'll discuss the second half of 9/11 for you, I could do that for you.
Well, absolutely, I do, and I'm going to give links to get in touch with Adam. You know, he's got one YouTube video out there. Got to be honest with you, I'm looking forward to you doing more because the audio's a little rough on there and everything. But
I know.
But I love the fact that, you know, you make a lot of sense. You've written some things on Facebook and stuff. So I'm going to give people your Facebook and your Twitter information. And if they want to get in touch with you and have more conversations with you about this, you're open to that, right?
Yeah, sure. In fact, the reason why I haven't done videos and become a huge channel, first of all, I'm not in this to be popular. And second of all, I'm pretty shy. So doing interviews and doing videos is still a little tense for me. But, you know, I'm comfortable right now talking to you. But, yeah, in the future, that first video, you know, is pretty primitive, actually. But I had my air conditioner on at the same time, too. That didn't work. But, yeah, no, in the future, I'm going to be doing probably a video a week from now on.
Well, look, I'm definitely looking forward to those, and I'm going to give you guys, like I said, the link to his YouTube channel and all of that. But quite honestly, you know, look, if you look back at my YouTube channel and you look at the original videos I put out years ago, you'll see the same kind of mistakes. Yeah. And don't worry about it. It happens. But the truth is that, you know, you're coming at this and providing a lot of information and putting the events in context, which, you know what, you turn out to be the perfect guy to start this series. And I appreciate you taking the time with us tonight and getting over your shyness. I try and make it as easy as possible for people to have conversations on this show, try to go along with their pace. And, you know, sometimes I do better than others. But quite honestly, I think this is interesting information and is never really heard in the discussions about 9/11, so I'm very glad you started off this way. Adam Fitzgerald is with me here on the Ochelli Effect tonight, and we are beginning the series on it's called 9/11 Voices, and we're going to have many different conversations regarding the subject over the next God knows how long, because I don't know how long we're going to have to keep going. But Adam Fitzgerald is with us for episode 1 here tonight. Stick around. We'll be right back.
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com. The brilliant author of The War State brings you exclusive reports about the big changes upcoming in the markets. WallStreetWindow.com.
Perhaps you're invested deeply.
Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
Hey there, it's Sunshine On, and I just wanted to stop by, say thanks to all you amazing listeners who are the Ochelli Effect of inspiration for your host Chuck Ochelli to remain free of paid corporate masters with ads that instill fear to sell products they want you to buy. Media's best independent network for guest interviews from the most unique perspectives. And yeah, my perspective's kind of unique, right? So anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much for tuning in, and let's keep it all ongoing. You can join in by clicking the donate button. Together, you are the Ochelli Effect.
We should learn from our relatively recent history, my brother. That's where I'm coming from. I say all power to the people.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media.
What? Ochelli. Ochelli. What? Ochelli. Nice to use this.
Chuck Ochelli.
Second hour of the Ochelli Effect begins now here at Ochelli.com. We are beginning the series on 9/11, which I'm calling 9/11 Voices. And the first voice you're getting to hear from in the series is Adam Fitzgerald, who joined us on the 9/11 special on Tuesday night. But since I did not feel as though I gave him a fair shake that night, and a couple of you apparently read my mind and told me the same thing in emails, guess what? We gave him 2 hours tonight, and we've gone through one of them so far. If you haven't heard it, it has provided you with a tremendous amount of context leading up to an interesting time period, still not quite on the day of 9/11, but here we are laying the groundwork, and you know what? Nobody else does this, as far as I'm concerned. You get anecdotes from a couple of people where they cherry pick a few facts because they think they'll be relevant later to their particular theory, and that's it. So we're not going to do it that way. I mean, on occasion, I'll bring on people who are going to, describe their theories and stuff like that. And I'm sure I'm going to have a few shows that I'm not happy with in this series. But I want to hear from rational, reasonable people who are still asking questions, who believe that we deserve much better answers than we've been given regarding this event in our fairly recent history. Like Larry Pinckney says during the bumper coming into the second hour, we should learn from our relatively recent history. And 9/11 is still relatively recent history, and we need to learn from what has happened to us ever after and change the trajectory, because I am not pleased, and I know most of you listening to this show are also not pleased by what has come after. So with all that in mind, let's go back to where Adam was, because, we were just talking about what happened after Bojanka and this grand plot, which did not materialize, but also we need to add in, there was the bombing of a couple of U.S. ships and a few other things. Oh, we're still in the Clinton presidency, aren't we? Anyway, let's continue on, because I want to hear the rest of what Adam has to say and really begin to get at the heart of the subject, as I know we're going to in this hour. So, Adam, you ready to go?
Yes, indeed.
All right. So, like you were saying, you have this interesting guy Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who has become famous for being the guy who was waterboarded and gave up a whole lot of information because he was intricately involved in the planning for 9/11. Now, I find it interesting that you're one of the few guys that acknowledges that Osama bin Laden was not really directing 9/11 because, a lot of people will state that bin Laden was already dead, that he had absolutely nothing to do with it, that if he did have something to do with it, then he was the apparent mastermind. How ridiculous is it that a 6'6" Saudi is dragging around, what do they call that for your kidneys? A dialysis machine through the desert and therefore directing terrorist plots via a satellite phone. And there's a whole lot of assumptions built into all of that. But I found it very interesting the way you explained that. And, please continue on where you left off.
Yeah, I was talking about the Hamburg cell. Now, this is the cell that's going to be responsible for carrying out the attacks of September 11th. I'm going to talk about the beginning stages of the cell. November 1st, 1998, Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Shehi, and Ramzi bin Shabib move into a three-room apartment in Germany, and the name of the city is Hamburg. That's why they got the name Hamburg Cell. The core of this group would meet every week. They would go into a mosque called Al-Quds Mosque, which is known for its radical views toward the West, toward Israel, and toward Takfiri-based countries. Now, Takfiri means a Muslim who is an apostate. They don't consider them actually Muslim. They would hold these views, but this core group, was led by Ramzi bin Shabib. Now, Ramzi bin Shabib is an important figure because he would be the direct link between the Hamburg cell and people like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Osama bin Laden. Every week they would hold these radical views, and they would talk about how they would discuss jihad. They would talk about entering into the war with Chechnya at the time, near Bosnia as well. And they would travel to Afghanistan in 1999, and they would finally meet with Osama bin Laden. They would pledge allegiance to him, and then they would get orders to be involved into the plot that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed is ordering them to do, which would take place. The name of the plot would be called The Big Wedding, or the Big Tuesday. Now, this, of course, wouldn't be known to any of the other people involved in the operation, but just to these people, and they would involve Mohammed Atta, Marwan al-Sheikh, Ziad Jarrah, and Ramzi bin Shabib. Ramzi bin Shabib was supposed to be one of the pilots, but later on, he wouldn't be able to get a U.S. visa, and they replaced him with Hani Hanjour.
Now, I have a question here, Adam, because
sure.
I got to be honest with you. When I've read about the part of the story that you're in right now,
right,
it seems very shaky, some of the evidence that they put together to draw this narrative that you're relating right now. A lot of this information could not have been known without having certain people present at certain times. It just seems like we are unaware of some informants here, or we're unaware of some surveillance here, which had to have captured a whole lot more information than what they got afterwards. When they started to reconstruct this and they were getting information from KSM and some of these other individuals, there are people that are left out of the equation, it seems like, and there are people that have to have really observed things in a certain way that the story gets strange. I got to say that I have questions about this part of the narrative entirely. I'm not saying it's all false, but what I'm saying is I feel like some of it was padded or possibly invented to bridge certain gaps in an investigation, and it seems really odd to me. Now, earlier on, you'd mentioned the Mossad character who was connected to the 93 bombing, okay? And of course, a lot of people want to bring up the Mossad right away when it comes to 9/11 and the connections of, and it must have been, some ghost Mossad agent. But to me, it leaves open the possibility for all kinds of things, including U.S. assets that, have to sort of vaporize in the evidence trail in order to be protected, one way or another. There's a lot of possibilities here. And it seems to me like in order to gather this information, unless they got it all after the fact, again, my biggest question is, nobody had any awareness about this stuff enough to possibly interfere with it directly from an intelligence or a law enforcement standpoint to put a stop to it? Because even when you hear from the neighbors to this Hamburg cell, right, and the observers who saw different things going on and describe scenarios where people are meeting and everything else, it seems like the stories are just a little too convenient. And in some cases, like I said, I think certain pieces of it were created to fill in gaps, or there is a much better eyeball on the situation than anybody wants to admit, because then it would have to lead to the concept of, well, if you knew this was going on, why didn't you do something about it? Whether it's the German government or it's the American intelligence or it's, Mossad's assets being involved or Pakistani intelligence, it doesn't matter who. What I'm saying is it almost feels like there's a bit of a a CYA thing going on here when it comes to this part of the story about the amount of knowledge that was had and the lack of response to it. What do you think about that, just personally?
No, that's an excellent point. Now, usually I always tell people, don't believe what I say. Just, write down what you think is the questionable points of what I'm saying, and I want you to research it for yourself, because that's how I learned about 9/11. I went out and specifically researched a lot of the points that I found questionable. Now, especially, you bring up another good point about how we know the finer details involving, like, the Hamburg cell, for example. How do we know that these people were traveling to Afghanistan, so to speak? How do we know that they were holding weekly meetings talking about anti-Western views, the real personal specific ideals? Now, that would be true. I think a lot of areas involving, like, pre-9/11, like shortly, especially in this era, like 98, 99, a lot of this stuff is colored in by the intelligence agencies themselves. Because I was going to bring up the fact that German intelligence and the CIA was monitoring the house in which Mohammed Atta, Ramzi bin Shibib were living in. But the information that they gathered was not shared between each agency. Now, this is going to be a repetitive problem that we're going to see leading up to 9/11. Now, this is how conspiracy starts, and that's understandable, because if I was, like, questioning 9/11 and I saw that the CIA wasn't sharing information, well, I'm going to ask why not. What was there to gain from them holding the information, not sharing it with, say, the FBI or the NSA or the DIA? What's the purpose behind it? And because you have speculation, that leads to conspiracy right away, because that's what the majority of conspiracy is. It's speculation. Mm-hmm. But for me, I'd rather deal with information than speculation, because what do you know? Because what you can know, you could show and you could prove in a court, but you can't go to court based on speculation. So that's why I'd rather not deal with it.
No, and I understand, and you're right to say that, and I'm glad you said it. But I just, you do have to acknowledge that there are gaps here. When somebody lays out a criminal court case, right, they have to give you the means, the motive, the opportunity, sure, but they've also got to, like, draw together a story that makes sense, right? What are lawyers generally? I mean, outside of the many derivative things we could say, if they're operating above board and, like legitimate people, they're writers in a way. And they have to tell a story to a jury or to a judge that they believe, because it makes sense. They have to back it up with evidence. They have to prove certain points. There's certain areas of the story arc that have to be fleshed out properly. But here's the thing about it, is that when you have so many gaps, regardless of whether it was, the conventional disconnect between agencies or, well, we couldn't exactly, we know the Germans are our allies, but we couldn't share information because we couldn't trust what they would do with it. These explanations lead directly to the question, like you said. Why couldn't something have been done about it? And wouldn't it be more important to at least create some level of prevarication against something that you obviously thought was dangerous if you were surveilling it? If you had some of these details ahead of time, then you knew that there was a problem that could emerge from it, right? So I just wanted to make that point in and of itself. I'm not trying to go to the speculations about who knew what or who was actually there. I just lent a mild speculation to what could be in those gaps to explain that there are large enough gaps there to be questioned. That's all. And I think that is something that does need to be examined. And the further we go in this story, again, this is sort of the justification for the fusion centers. For, why is it that all of your information personal can now be collected by the NSA and therefore handed over to Homeland Security anytime? This is why it was justified, and I get it to some degree. But the idea that it's gone way too far is something I can't avoid commenting on. It is absolutely out of control in my estimation. But putting all that aside, let's continue on with what you're talking about so I don't run you out of time. Again, I just want to be fair to the idea, though, that there are some gaps here that may or may not have been colored in with things that are not based on the best evidence, so to speak, in an investigation. They've been presented as the narrative, but it doesn't mean that the narrative doesn't have some holes in it as well, which could lead to other bits of knowledge if you were to investigate it yourself or have a look at some of the things that are still classified, et cetera, right?
Right. And you know what? It's an important point. I hate to lead your audience on, but I'm going to be guilty of doing it. If you can't see that the intelligence apparatus like the CIA or the Defense Intelligence Department or the NSA doesn't know what's going on at this point, you're living in, like I said, a field of ignorance. Right. They are listening in on these phone calls that they're making. They're following the travels of these certain individuals to Afghanistan. They're red flagged, these people. So it's not like they don't know. They know. And one of the operations I'm going to talk about, because it's relative, because at around this time in 1999, a classified military operation, which was led by the U.S. Special Operations Command and the Defense Intelligence Agency, was called Able Danger. Right. Able Danger was about a dating mining program that was to collect information associated with open source information, classified information about two cells that were operating in the United States and abroad. That was the Hamburg cell and the Brooklyn cell, led by the Blind Sheikh. Later on, years to come, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer and four others identified these cells, but the information was suppressed by by the Pentagon. And Schaefer was denied a security clearance later on in the years to come. In 2005, Republican Kurt Weldon actually brought this up in the House Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was yelling at Pentagon, actually saying, why is he being absconded? Why was he ordered to destroy all the terabytes of information that he collected about these cells? Why? That's a good question, but we don't know.
Right. For the record, I have spoken to Tony Schaefer, and I have not been able to convince him to come on my show and discuss the details of this. He has not appeared on this show as of yet. I've spoken to him off air. And G. Michael Springmeyer has been on this show and talked about how the State Department reacted to these individuals and the passports and all that. If you go back in the archives, you can find some pretty detailed discussions about what actually occurred. Okay. And it is a nexus of questions that need to be asked here as to why it is, as you aptly stated, there were red flagged individuals who were still being allowed to travel into places where, maybe it would have behooved our security agencies to do something about them if they were as dangerous as they proved to be later, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of open questions here, is what I mean to insert. And, Anthony Schaefer is still one of those begging questions, if you will, out there regarding Able Danger and exactly what was collected, why it was suppressed, etc. So go ahead, continue.
Right. He was obviously railroaded, actually. So, but to continue, at about an important meeting would take place between January 5th to January 8th of 2000. Now, this would be the Kuala Lumpur Al-Qaeda Summit meeting. This would invite all the high-level targets of Al-Qaeda, including other terrorist organizations like Abu Sayyaf, Jamaat al-Islamiyah. This would compose of Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hamzi, and these are two people who were involved with the 9/11 hijacking and the bombing of the USS Cole in 2000 later on. Ramzi bin Shabib would attend the meeting, and Tawfiq bin Atash and Hambali. All these are high-level, I'm talking about high-level terrorist operatives. Now, the CIA, along with the Malaysia authorities, couldn't bug the meeting. Supposedly, they took pictures of all the people that were coming in and out of the meeting, which is taking place in a hotel rented from al-Hazmi himself. And then on January 15th, this would be very important. January 15th of 2000, Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hamzi entered the United States. They would arrive at Los Angeles International. Now, according to FBI Director, I'm forgetting his name at the moment. I can't remember his name.
Was Brandon the director then?
No, it wasn't. I wish I could remember his name, but he reported before the 9/11 Commission. Oh, I'm sorry, Dieter Snell. That's his name. Okay. Dieter Snell. He actually reported before the 9/11 Commission, testified. He states that when Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hamzi entered the United States, they had no idea where they were for the first 2 weeks. Now, what I'm going to say right off the bat before you is according to the testimony of one person. Now, this person, his name is Khalid Ben-Marine. He's an Algerian taxi driver. He states that he picks both Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Mihdhar from the airport and drops them off at LAX, Hilton LAX. They would stay there. Now, this is important because on January 13th, the rooms are rented for them under the names of Saeed Abdullah and Saeed Abdallah. Now, the person who rented these rooms is the information which was subpoenaed by the 9/11 Commission. That person's name is redacted, so we don't know who rented the room. But this would go and prove that Dieter Snell is actually lying before the commission. He's committing perjury because they know where these people are at. Now, they don't rent their names under Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hamzi. That's who they were as Saeed Abdullah and Saeed Abdallah. Now, right. They were there. They left the room in January 2000, January 16th of 2000. But the reports come out later that the FBI actually knew they were staying there. Now, why would they not talk about this in the 9/11 Commission? I'm not going to give it a speculative answer. I'll leave that up to the reader. And we don't know. But slowly but surely after that, the Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hamzi actually meet a Saudi national by the name of Omar al-Bayoumi. He actually provides lodging for them. He gives them a car. They live openly in San Diego. They meet another Saudi national named Omar Basnan. He's a little bit more radical. He espouses the views of bin Laden, calls him a hero. They stay there in San Diego for a while. Now, slowly but surely, during the year 2000, most of the Hamburg cell is now inside the United States. Mohammed Atta, Ziad Jarrah, and Marwan al-Shehhi. They live in Florida. They start training under Huffman Aviation. They get their licenses. They go to numerous training men in Oklahoma City, in Oklahoma, in Florida, in New Jersey. They all live in certain parts of the area. Now, while they're in Florida, they do get help moving. Now, there's an Israeli moving company called Urban Moving Systems, but there are other moving systems that are a part of Urban Moving Systems called Classic International Movers. You have White Glove Movers. These are all moving companies that are linked because all these moving companies are Mossad fronts. Now, the Mossad operatives are living in Florida 1 block away from Mohammed Atta and Marwan al-Shehi and Ziad Jarrah. So they're living nearby these Saudi operatives, and they're living too close to home. So, in other words, that these Israeli operatives are also following the Saudi nationals and Saudi operatives and Al-Qaeda operatives all around the country. Now, of course, this would lead to the effect of why wasn't this information relayed to the FBI? Because the FBI at this point doesn't know Khalid al-Mihdhar, Nawaf al-Hamzi, Mohammed Atta are inside the United States because the CIA doesn't let them know. Now, about 3 weeks prior to the attacks of 9/11, the CIA then relates the information that Nawaf al-Hamzi and Khalid al-Mihdhar are in California at this time, but they aren't. They're gone. They're long gone at this point. But the FBI now has to scurry in a hurry, to get enough manpower to follow these people around who they don't even know where they are. So this poses a problem. Now, why didn't the CIA relate the information to the FBI? And this would later on be more extrapolated under the Joint House inquiry, which took place in 2002. This would lead to the attacks of 9/11 themselves, which took place, of course, on September 11, 2001.
Well, let me stop you right there for just a second.
Sure.
And here's why. A realistic study of the interaction between the FBI and the CIA over the course of many decades will tell you that it's not all that unusual, that the CIA did not share information with the FBI. You would think, now, logically speaking, common sense would tell you, the listener, well, but this is a domestic threat. Wouldn't the CIA, who is not, based on its charter, allowed to operate within the United States, although it does, wouldn't they pass this along to the National Policing Agency, which would be the FBI at that time, because we didn't have a Department of Homeland Security, did we? Wouldn't they pass it along as a professional courtesy? The answer, ladies and gentlemen, is no. They don't. It is actually rather rare, or at least used to be rather rare, that the CIA shared information even with the FBI. And this is not just in the case of grand conspiracies. This is not just in the case of major events. This is in the case of, various smuggling activities that take place. To be honest with you, they don't let Customs know about stuff, the CIA, even though customs enforcement could be rather useful when it comes to stopping the shipment of certain things coming into or out of the country, or where people have traveled to that maybe the CIA is privy to somebody utilizing a fake name and the FBI doesn't get a flag on it, and our State Department doesn't know that there are individuals who shouldn't be allowed into the United States that have been allowed in the United States. This disconnect is actually not nefarious. I'm sorry to say. It seems like it would be. It seems like it's, one of these things that you should say, well, gee, doesn't it make sense? They didn't tell them because they must have been in on a plot. No. It's actually standard operating procedure. The CIA doesn't share its information without an absolute need to share said information. And you might think that, defending the American mainland against a potential terrorist attack would be one of those things, but not really. That is not what that. It's just I don't know how else to explain this. Adam, I'm correct about this, though, right?
Right. It's not unusual. In fact, I get a lot of feedback from people saying, "Oh, it was the reason why the CIA was because they wanted the attacks to happen." That is unknown at this time. But right now, the CIA actually states that they don't share information with the FBI, and this has been long going on. I mean, for decades and decades, that they notoriously are like competing agencies to gather information. Michael Scheuer, who was the head of the Alex station that was following bin Laden terrorists, they had problems with the CIA not getting cables regarding the Yemeni house, the safe house, which they bugged the phone. They wouldn't get the necessary cables on one end from the CIA if the DIA was on the other end. It's like they were competing agencies competing for information to make like a big bust, which would have been, actually, they could have prevented 9/11, but because of their infighting and the almost this like sectarian nature of the intelligence agencies, it really impeded the progress of arresting the individuals involved.
Right. And now, time and time again, okay, studying the Kennedy assassination, to be honest with you, you can read in J. Edgar Hoover's handwriting his frustration. I mean, literally his handwriting too, not just the memorandums he had typed up, but the handwriting in the margins of the memorandums. His frustration with the CIA lying to him, denying him information. That's J. Edgar Hoover. And also an internal memorandum to the CIA, which you don't know who the author is of these little hand scrawlings. Sometimes you find on documents, but they're irritated with Hoover because Hoover's not helping them. Okay. Like literally going back to the 1960s, you can see in black and white the evidence that these two agencies did not cooperate hand in glove. And, has it been costly? Absolutely. Has it led to, look, we can judge it any which way we want, but the idea that the CIA might have wanted this to happen, I don't discount it entirely, but it's not proof that the CIA was in on this or wanted it to happen because they didn't cooperate with the FBI. I mean, that's the main point to gather here, right?
Right. I think that's absolutely important to say that there is no definitive proof that the CIA were intimately involved. Now, I could probably make a really good argument that they may have wanted it to happen to prosper what comes afterwards, but that's going to be a tough sell, but I could probably do it. But as like intimately involved in the planning and orchestrating of the attacks, no. I mean, what I just said prior to how the attacks took place, you could read for yourself. I'm talking about the listener on the radio station. Right. This is open source information. It's not like information I came across underneath the parking garage with a person handing me documents.
No, I understand it. Believe me, that's what I'm saying here too. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the CIA, okay, they, if you want to place responsibility on them, we could talk about who it is they chose to fund, who it is they chose to help out in other situations that might have come back and backfired on them here. Because again, there was intelligence agency operatives that were involved in helping out Osama bin Laden and his people. There was intelligence agency operatives involved in helping out many people who have, come to become extremely prominent in terrorist circles, so to speak. Could you say that was intentionally done? You could make that argument. You could also say that, it was done to make sure that we had a justification to continue building the giant beast that is the military-industrial complex. Sure, a lot of horrific things have been allowed to happen and have been conducted solely for that purpose, in my estimation. But again, you got to prove that case. And this idea that they didn't cooperate with the FBI is not proof. It's not prima facie evidence to that effect. Could you build that case in another way? Yes. Go ahead. And please do. But to try and use this is not going to work. So continue on with where you were, because here we go leading into the attacks themselves. Right.
Well, the attacks took place early in the morning. You had World Trade Center Tower number 1 attacked first. Tower number 2 by Flight 175 attacked second. Of course, third was the Pentagon by Flight 77. And, of course, the plane that went down in Shanksville, which a lot of people say that was probably heading to either the State Department, the U.S. Capitol, or Langley. It isn't definitively known, but that was the last plane. That was United Flight 93. Now, when the initial attack took place, the first World Trade Center 1 impacted by Flight 11, American Airlines 11. There was a resident named Maria who was living in Doric Towers. Doric Towers is in Union City, New Jersey. She was watching the attacks with the binoculars. It's a straight shot right into downtown. While she's watching the attacks unfold, she was noticing a group of men that was filming the attacks and they were acting rather excitably, almost like a joyous emotion. and she reports this to the NYPD. They come out there. She sees their license plate. She writes down license plates. So there's be on the lookout, a bolo, for a white van with the license plate, blah, blah, blah. We don't know the license plate number. But during about 3:30 in the afternoon on the New Jersey Turnpike, the white van was seen by an officer named Scott DiCarlo. And Scott DiCarlo, who's a New Jersey state trooper, actually pulls over the van. He has a rough time getting the driver out. The driver then gets out of the car after a scuffle. He then states openly to Scott DiCarlo, he goes, "We are not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem. Your problem are our problems." Now, Scott DiCarlo says, "What the hell is this about?" He pats him down. He finds about $5,000 cash in his sock, another $4,700 in his fanny pack. He sees a map that was outlined in yellow, the World Trade Center, the George Washington Bridge, and Doric Towers, and he brings them in for questioning at the one City Plaza. They're there for 71 days. They fail all their polygraphs. They're not very fruitful or productive with the FBI and New York Task Force. They're there for 71 days, but they're let go under pressure from two unnamed U.S. senators and Alan Dershowitz, who acts as a mediator. They all go back to Israel, and it's later found out that two of the brothers, Sivan and Paul Kurzberg, are Mossad operatives. Now, what does this mean? Now, whether these were people that were following the object. Now, by the way, also, just to let you know, the manager of Urban Moving Systems, Dominic Suter, is brought in by the FBI for questioning. But he flees the country when he's ordered in for a second interview. They leave the moving company behind, leaving everything behind, the furniture, the computers left behind, and these were all collected by the FBI. And it shows that during the year of 2001, Urban Moving Systems never got any money. But in July of 2001, they received a $500,000 deposit from an unnamed source in Israel. Now, who knows what that is? We don't know. The information's not available to us. But it goes to show you that, yes, it seems that the Mossad operatives were following these hijackers around, didn't tell the FBI or the State Department what they were doing. Now, this leads to speculation as to why. Were they allowing these attacks to happen? Did they participate in these attacks? It does show you that they followed these hijackers around. They at times moved them to certain place to place. But to show you that there's more questions than answers regarding 9/11 that we don't know. But it does show you that you have Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Israel, and the United States all acting in accordance, not sharing the information that could have prevented 9/11. They could have. Now,
let me hit you with one thing though before you go any further.
Sure.
Because here's the thing. You assert, okay, these guys are following these guys around, helping them move. Well, it's a far different animal, though, to be perched on a rooftop with a good seat for the attacks. That means that they knew what the target was, because following these guys physically around, these planes came out of different places, right? So they would have to know ahead of time in order to arrive and be there for the event that this was going to go down and exactly what the target was. So that means that foreknowledge is, I don't think it's any sort of leap of faith here to believe that foreknowledge had to have been possible among these individuals who might have filmed it, who might have been witnessing it, regardless of whether they were cheering or not. I don't know. But point is, interesting that two people that are proven to be connected to the Mossad, were at the very least aware of the targets ahead of time, right? So, to say that, it's kind of just a wide open question. This means that intimate knowledge of what was going to happen had to have been in possession of these individuals in advance, right?
Right. Now, to push forward that theory that certain agencies have pre-knowledge, William Binney, who is a former NSA cryptolinguist of the National Security Agency, says in the documentary called The Good American, he says right off the bat in the documentary, says that they had information, the NSA had collected information about the hijackers as far back as 1999. he states that the NSA never read the information, the metadata it's called, the phone records, the emails, text messages, whatever, right? They didn't read the information because the information was so great that they needed more manpower. I'm just going to say this. If you want to believe that, that's fine. If you want to believe that they allowed the attacks to happen, they didn't read the information, they didn't share it, you're allowed, but there's no definitive proof. That's why it goes back to the important statement that you made earlier, that there's no definitive proof. We can only insinuate that they had the information, they just didn't get around to reading it. Who knows if that's true or not?
See, but again, a ludicrous assertion, and I'm going to tell you why. I applied for work with the NSA, right?
Right.
And here's the thing. I wanted to be a signals analyst. That was going to be the job I wanted. Okay. And there were entire armies of people that were involved, okay, in literally dealing with this metadata you're talking about. Okay, and analyzing signals, just like the title sort of suggests. There were people that were involved that were constantly on rotation, both civilian and military assets, working hand in hand with each other at the NSA. This is a reality because I know what I was applying for. And also huge computer systems from that time period, which were also involved in the sorting of that data. That explanation is just false on its face as far as I'm concerned, based on just the relatively limited knowledge I have of the inner workings of the agency at the time. So this to me is ludicrous. The second thing is that still we're talking about, well, we might have had the information, but we didn't process it. Well, in order for these guys to be, again, perched on a building and observing it. See, a lot of people say I don't pay enough attention to this, but I do. It's just that I don't make wild assumptions based on it. What I'm saying is that you could argue, and I'm very sure I could convince a jury or a judge to understand that in order for these guys to be positioned where they were and to be observing what they did and to having been following these individuals around or being connected to them means that they knew what was going to happen. That is the only way outside of reading their minds that I think you can draw that conclusion, and I believe I could argue that in front of anybody and win. Because how else do you get to, they just happened to be on that building that day, even though they were remotely connected, they didn't know the specifics, they weren't able to analyze it, they weren't able to know what was going on. Let's just say that it was only a surveillance operation and they weren't intimately involved in any of it. Let's just say that it was surveillance. They had to have had their intelligence sorted well enough to be there. So the American excuse, I don't buy it because of what I know. But this other thing about how, well, maybe it was connected, maybe it wasn't, I certainly believe it was connected. But the idea that is extrapolated then to conclude that it was being run by the Mossad, to conclude that it was a Mossad operation actually, and all of this is where I start to turn away because I want your evidence. I want your evidence for it. And we can draw a reasonable conclusion that there was foreknowledge, that they knew the intimate details of, because otherwise they couldn't have been in that position. Okay, because how else do you explain that, right?
Right, and I agree with the premise that they had foreknowledge and allowed the attacks to happen. Right. I'm what they call a lie hop, let it happen on purpose. But I can't personally go more than that. I can't put because there's people within the truth community that say that there were no hijackers, that it was just Jews on the planes, that they flew the planes into like a Cleveland hangar. They forced all the people to make phone calls. I mean, there's an abundance, a saturation of fantastical scenarios. And what they do is they cover up the information that I presented to you today. Like the stuff that I talked about today, that's the stuff that never gets talked about in 9/11 circles. That's just from my experience. I don't know.
And you're exactly right. And that's my point here, though. And that's why I only took it as far as I did and then said, look, when you go to jump in this other direction, that's where I stop, because I want the evidence that shows it. And without it, you have a lot of speculation, and we could speculate all day. You know, I used to say, well, gee, that explanation has as much evidence as, you know, again, I'll go back to the Kennedy assassination because it's something I have lots of knowledge about. But I would argue when people would present to me some very crazy theories, I would say, listen, your explanation has as much evidence to it as what I'm about to say to you, which is, how about an invisible alien hung upside down from a UFO and shot Kennedy in the face? Because you can't see it. I told you he was invisible, and I've got about as much proof for that as what you just said. Do you realize that? And literally, that's what a lot of people have done, is created these very complex explanations, okay, for some things that really could be looked at rather logically and understood. And I'm not saying trust all the official information. At all points here, I've said, question the investigation even. Question why it was conducted in the way it was. How do you get this much detail without really having all the knowledge? Because they later claimed they didn't know that this or that was actually going on. Well, how do you have all of these other bits of foreknowledge but not that? You know, where is the asset that got you that knowledge? I want to see it laid out step by step. And I believe it can be done. Okay, but And I also know that not everything has, you know, entirely filled in gaps. There's always going to be gaps in any sort of investigation. I get it. But there's usually a reasonable chasm versus, you know, the most fanciful and crazy thing that can be invented. And when it comes to this concept of Israel, to say that they had foreknowledge, to say that they had involvement when it comes to the Mossad, to me, that is something that can be proven through some of the facts that you've laid out and some of the facts other people have laid out. But to begin to create a huge, you know, I don't know what else to call it, but it just becomes something that is spun like a barn, like a ball of yarn that, you know, started out with a pebble in the middle of it and now has become basketball size. You know, most of it has just been spun together. It's not the reality. And I think we need to be a lot more cautious about the theorizing. You know, we have to theorize to fill in gaps. I get that. But we have to be a little more cautious about letting it grow unchecked ever after. You know, so I appreciate all of what you're doing here tonight, and I would like you to finish up because we're down to almost the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's amazing how quick this goes. And you've given a lot of information. Again, Adam Fitzgerald has been with me here, and I'm going to give you guys links to be able to get in touch with him. And, you know, as I encourage you to continue the discussion with him. Obviously, I want to continue the discussion on here, and I'd love to hear from you guys. info@Ochelli.com is the main website email where I'm the only one who's getting it anyway. I just want you guys to know that. But you know what? That is where I put everything. Everything comes through the stream there. So your suggestions, your criticisms, your comments, everything can be sent through there, and I read it all. I try to respond to all of it, but I sometimes I don't, I know. But almost all of it I respond to, and I always respond to people reaching out to me with reasonable concepts, reasonable ideas, reasonable criticisms. I answer all of that as best I can. And I know that that Adam would also be interested in reasonable conversations with people. Because you know what? Even though you've learned a lot, you would love to learn more, and I'm sure you'd love to continue the conversation because there's still much to be done regarding getting to the bottom of this. And one way or another, it's going to take some cooperation, it's going to take some attention, and it's going to take some effort, which is going to have to be collective. So again, I'm encouraging this as best I can through this show. So, Adam, please continue, though. I wanted to get all that out of the way so we didn't run right out of time, but we've got only about 10 minutes left, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, regarding, I want to backtrack just a little bit. Regarding foreknowledge, if you're not persuaded by foreknowledge, that's fine. But just to give you a little tidbit, just to add, on October 24th of the year 2000, the Pentagon actually had an exercise called the Pentagon Mass Casualty Exercise. And this required, the exercise produced a plane actually crashing into the Pentagon. Now that it's not that kind of a stretch, but look,
the cover photo to the literature, if I remember correctly,
was the plane in the Pentagon.
Yes,
so, in the yard. But look, these people, there's a lot of people that would have to be involved. No, not really, but you can get the idea where I'm going at. All you need is certain people, certain high-level people that have a mass influence upon the military-industrial complex, the State Department, the intelligence apparatus, which they're all interlinked anyway. But it just takes a certain amount of people to have the information that could have been prevented the attacks of 9/11, but allowed it to happen anyway because the benefits would outweigh the impacts of the attacks themselves. Now, like I told you before, the impacts of 9/11 far outweigh, and I'd like to come back and talk about that as well. What we see after 9/11 it makes 9/11 infantile in its whole structure, because what came after it it's like the Frankenstein monster arrived from the table and is still like pillaging the town, because this is all just a pretext. I mean, 1993 bombing, the Soviet war, Bojinka plot, the attacks on the embassies in 1998, the USS Cole, all of this leads. It's a puzzle piece into 9/11 and forward. So, and I didn't even get into like the pilots of 9/11, Ziad Jarrah, who is supposedly the pilot of Flight 93. Well, just to add a little bit to you, according to numerous people on the plane, I'm not talking about the flight attendants. I'm talking about I think one of them was Tom Beamer, who was on the plane. He was talking to a flight attendant. I think he was talking to somebody from United Airlines, and he says that there were 3 hijackers. Mark Bingham, who called his mother, said there were 3 hijackers. Now, there's another stewardess. She calls, there was C.C. Lyles, who's a police officer. She calls to her husband, and he actually picks up, and she says there's 3 hijackers. According to the 9/11 Commission report, there were 4 hijackers. Now, according to 3 people, citizens, and 1 stewardess, there's 3 hijackers on board. So, and Ziad Jarrah was supposedly the pilot. This came out in the 2006 Zacharias Moussaoui trial. In 2006, the families were allowed to hear the cockpit recording. This is the only cockpit reporting that was recovered out of all 4 crashes. Later, just before they crash, there's a person sitting next to the pilot. The pilot's supposed to be Ziad Jarrah. The person sitting next to the pilot is saying, Saeed, up, down, Saeed, up, down, meaning to have the plane up and down because they're trying to get into the cockpit. You could hear them trying to get into the cockpit using I think it was like one of the lunch things where they bring food to you.
According to the story, they bashed a beverage cart up against the cockpit door.
Right. Now, but this will lead to believe, who is Saeed? Well, there was a hijacker on board Flight 93. His name was Saeed Al-Ghamdi. Supposedly, he's just a muscle hijacker. But in the recording, which the families heard, they're saying it's Saeed Al-Ghamdi. He's the pilot. So what happened to Ziad Jarrah? That's a question for another day. But as you can see, there's a whole bunch of anomalies with just 9/11. But what I wanted to produce for you today was just a buildup of what happened, a pretext to 9/11 itself, like a historical aspect of what led to 9/11. But for the more like distinct anomalies, which I was one of them I produced the other day to you, I'll come on another day and speak on just the anomalies of 9/11 that often go unspoken in general conversation. But my problem is with truthers is that certain truthers like to give like this fantastical scenario of no planes, half planes, mini nukes, directed energy weapons. This is all disinformation to cloud you from the facts of what happened, the finer details of that day in which I just stated just now.
Right, and you know what's interesting about that, Adam, is that quite honestly, there are so many open questions, and you brought up the phone calls. I think it is a valid point to question how some of those phone calls are made. because, you know, there have been varied explanations about that, and it's very difficult to suss out the story, if you will, of exactly how those things were done. See, when you're taking a look at a piece of evidence, I mean, is it possible that some of this evidence was fabricated, some of it was filled in? You know, I don't dismiss that entirely. That some evidence here may have been faked, some evidence might have been disappeared, absconded with. You know, I've heard more than one story from somebody who was cleaning up the site, okay, you know, in New York City about the possibility of, guess what? Some of those other recordings being found, at least the black boxes being found, that were allegedly never found. I've heard stories from other people contradicting a lot of the official story. These are people that really are not getting anything out of telling you something against the official story. Now, I know that there's a lot of craziness out there, and I know there's a lot of fabrication out there. Some people insert themselves. And unfortunately, I even found myself dealing with somebody that I feel as though inserted themselves into 9/11 in order to, I don't know what, get some attention. I'm not sure what the motive is. But, you know, it was a weird thing. Their story fell apart when I examined it. You know what I mean? I think all of this evidence is worthy of careful reexamination. Okay? And we do know that on some level, though, we have been deceived regarding this event. That is one thing that I will not accept another answer on. We have not been dealt with honestly about the event that is 9/11, and we have not been given the truth about the trajectory that was absolutely launched off of the pad called 9/11 that is what I describe constantly as the post-9/11 reality. And I'm looking forward to another show with you where we'll talk about some of these anomalies. We may have to do more than one, though, because I got a feeling we're going to have some back and forth about them.
Sure.
But this is how it's going to get done, is let's look at the evidence. Let's start to put aside what has been adopted for certain people's purposes, whether it's for the official story or it's for the most outrageous of theories, or it's, you know, ray guns and the space aliens, or it's mini nukes or all this other nonsense. What it comes down to is there was a horrific event that was orchestrated by someone, that was allowed to happen either by incompetence or by intention. And a lot of people died, and a lot of people continue to die to this day for that particular purpose, which is why this is still an important subject and why I'm going to do this series. And I want to thank you again for being the first one to step into what you didn't know you were kicking off a series of shows.
I had no idea.
But, you know, but I think this is exactly the way it should have been done. And people might not know your name right now. Again, you're not doing this for popularity or for attention or anything else. But if you're going to inject the type of thought process and the type of information that you have put together into the conversation, then I'm pretty sure people need to get to know your name and need to get to know what it is you're talking about so that they can understand what it is they're looking at to begin with. So, again, I want to thank you, and I really appreciate it. The final question that I ask a lot of people that I have on the show, Adam, I'm going to give you like a minute to respond to it.
Okay.
And I do this to almost everybody, but what is it that you would like people to take away from our discussion tonight, just overall in a short sort of, half a paragraph kind of thought process? What is it that you would like people to take away if they never considered this topic, just tuned in tonight, it's their first time listening to this, and they go, well, gee, what is it I need to take away from this conversation? In short form, what would you say?
I'm hoping that what they take away from it is a short education about a very large and complex subject. And I think that would be the most important part, really, for future 9/11 discussion, is to have a general understanding, a rational understanding of what happened on 9/11, and then that becomes the echo for other people. They could tell other people about what they learned from other people, but but have a rational discourse. That's what's missing, for me anyway, for 9/11, rational discourse.
I absolutely agree with you, and I hope that everybody takes away the fact that Adam went to great pains tonight, Adam Fitzgerald went to great pains tonight to lay down the context and the foundations for the events that led to 9/11. And this is exactly the way that this series needed to start off. So thanks again, Adam, and thank you to all of you who decided to listen tonight. Again, don't care if you tuned in later or whatever else. I appreciate you for taking the time to listen and consider what has been discussed here. After all, no matter whether you're Adam Fitzgerald, who's been on with me tonight, somebody who contributes to the show, goes to the chat room, or tells a friend about it. Fact is, I am merely Ochelli. All of you are the effect. Have a good night.